Welcome to Piecing It Together number 14, and this is going to be an account of the plague which raged in Russia in 1771, or I771. And this is very interesting. Not only is this like the greatest panorama I've ever seen, and like biggest, but this is a very interesting take of the plague, which apparently ravaged about 5 years before our independence around here. This was going on all over the place, and it's something you don't really hear about, but I-771 in 1771 and beyond, something crazy happened, and it's very reminiscent of something that happened a couple years ago and is still pretty much going on now. And it seems like the same methods were being used to control, to poison, to destroy, to confuse, to do everything, to deceive, to just ravage the population and reset, which is pretty ridiculous when the buildings and world looks like that, to be able to still put fast ones on the majority of population. But here we go. I want to read some accounts of this, and I'm going to include all of the sections that I have here. So every page here is what I'll read from, some of it at least, but I'll include the link below, and the book is awesome, so I recommend checking it out, but certain things just have to be read, starting with this one. The preface. Histories of the plague, exhibiting the modifications it undergoes in different climates, must at all times and in all places be acceptable, if not to the public at large, at least to the class of persons who make the art of medicine their study and employ. But to a country situated like our own, histories of this terrible disorder occurring in the northern parts of Europe are more particularly interesting, by holding up to our view a picture of what it probably would be whenever it should visit us again. Such a picture is presented to us in the history of the plague, which depopulated Moscow and other parts of the Russian Empire in the year I-771, and which forms the subject of the following pages. What, at the present time, must give a greater degree of interest to such a subject is the danger to which we are exposed of importing the pestilential contagion from America, on the one hand, and from Turkey and the Levant on the other. For although the cold has, happily, suppressed for the present the pestilence which has been committing such dreadful ravages at Philadelphia and New York, yet is it to be feared that it may be retained in many houses, and lie dormant in various goods, ready to break out again whenever it shall be favored by the weather. And no one who is acquainted with the nature of that contagion can deny the possibility of its importation from America into this country, either now or hereafter, by infected persons or infected merchandise. On the other hand, are we not threatened with a familiar danger from the east? In executing the hostile operations which are going forwards in the Mediterranean, it seems scarcely possible for our fleets and armies to keep clear of contagion. No nation was ever long engaged in a war with the Turks without taking the plague. In this respect, they are as much to be dreaded by their friends as their foes. If, in the present context, Italy and France and England shall escape this scourge, it will form an exception to past events, which all Europe must devoutly pray for. Under these circumstances, the translator thought it would be useful to call the attention of the practitioners in medicine of this country to the subject of pestilential contagion by publishing the following account of the plague at Moscow in the year I-771. Besides the narrative of the rise and progress of the disorder and the descriptions of its symptoms and treatment, this account contains also a detail of the methods which were successfully employed in that city for checking and totally extinguishing the contagion, and in particular a detail of the means by which a large edifice, situated in the center of Moscow and containing about 1,400 persons, was preserved from the pestilence during the whole of the time that it raged there. So I'll read a little bit more from this section, but also just the parts that I'm going to include are parts that I found to be a little important. Definitely check everything else, but there's stuff about foundling hospitals and all kinds of different things which also kind of go against the virus theory, because certain places were unaffected, certain people were unaffected. It seemed like a lot of the poor wasn't necessarily taken down. And it seems, I don't know, you'll see. I'll keep going. So many works have been published on the plague that whoever writes a regular treatise on this disorder cannot avoid repeating many observations that have been made by others before him. Sounds like us, just a plethora, way too much nauseating misinformation and some good information. Hence, instead of dividing the present pamphlet into chapters and sections and following the original word for word throughout, the translator has taken the liberty of extracting from the last 2 chapters those parts only which contain new observations. There's one part here which I thought was interesting. Besides the preface and some other matters noticed in their respective places, the following topics of discussion have been omitted. 1. The comparison between the plague and the smallpox. 2. The reflections on the inoculation of the plague. 3. The precautions to be employed in wars with the Turks. And 4. The precautions continually necessary in places exposed to the pestilential contagion. So it explains a little here. It says, these topics have been omitted because with regard to the first, as the smallpox and the plague agree in no other respect but in that of being propagated by contagion, a comparison between them seems to be quite unnecessary. Because, as to the second, this is the good one, the inoculation of the plague is proved to be useless by the well-established fact that the same person is susceptible of taking it several times. And because with regard to the third and fourth points, they only lead to repetitions of general and particular precautions mentioned in other parts of the pamphlet. So, that part about the inoculations is very interesting. Well-established fact that the same person is susceptible of taking it several times. Didn't just Fauci, that monster, come out and say people still need to get their shots and get a 4th booster? What a monster. The same thing, the same playbook just still works on the masses. Like, what does that say about us all, about the majority of people around us, that this same kind of thing can work even when your physical, like, the stuff that you see kind of doesn't really totally match what you're hearing in the news. So then I wanted to read this other part, which I found interesting, an account of the plague at Moscow. And always keep into mind, these are the books that survived. You know, the books that, think about the books that are going to survive unless we can eradicate this nonsense. The books that would survive if these people end up winning and resetting again. Like, they're gonna glorify themselves. They're gonna glorify the people that just followed orders the most, the people that were the worst. And so that's just kind of how it seems to go. But keep that in mind when you read this. An account of the plague at Moscow. In 1769, war broke out between the Russians and Turks. The year following, intelligence was received that the Turks had carried the plague into Wallachia in Moldavia, where it was making great ravages, and that in the town of Jaffe a number of Russians had been carried off by a disorder, which on its first appearance was called by some of the faculty a malignant fever, but which the most eminent physicians in the place declared to be the plague. Baron Asch, first physician to the army, sent an account of this disorder in a letter written in German to his brother, a physician at Moscow, who showed it to me. The following is a translation thereof. Here it is. It attacks people in different ways. Some are slightly indisposed, complaining for several days of a headache, sometimes very violent, at other times less so, and now and then ceasing altogether, and then coming on again. The patients are affected with pains in the chest and particularly in the neck. They gradually become languid and dejected, with something like intoxication and drowsiness. They have a particular taste in their mouths, which soon turns to a bitter. At the same time, they have an ardor, a urine. To these succeed chilly and hot fits, and lastly all the symptoms which characterize the plague. The disease sometimes terminates favorably by perspiration, just by sweating it out, before the appearance of exanthemata, buboes, or carbuncles. The contagion is sometimes more rapid and more violent in its action. In that case, the infected are suddenly seized after making a hearty meal, after a fit of anger, or too much bodily motion, with headache, nausea, and vomiting. The eyes become inflamed and watery, and pains are felt in those parts of the body where buboes and carbuncles are about to appear. There is no great degree of heat. The pulse is sometimes full and hard, sometimes small, soft, and scarcely perceptible. It often intermits, and what should be particularly noticed, it is often feeble. These symptoms are accompanied with lassitude of white tongue, dry skin, urine of a pale yellow color, or turbid but without sediment, frequently with a diarrhea which it is difficult to stop, and lastly with delirium, buboes, carbuncles, and petechiae. And so that's just interesting because it's the similar array of treatments where it could be a multitude of different things, different things that are causing all these things, but everybody has Oh, if you have any of these symptoms, it could be a light pulse, could be a heavy pulse, could be anything in between. You may have this. If you have weird smelling urine or dark urine or light urine, it could be either one. You never know. You might go from hot or cold. You might be normal. You might be asymptomatic and still have it. Oh my God. What a terrible thing. And so this one little part says, the following summer this disorder spread into Poland, this is 1770, i770, and committed great havoc there. From thence it passed to Kiev, where it destroyed 4,000 souls. Immediately on its appearance at the last mentioned place, all communication between that town and Moscow was cut off. Guards were stationed on all the great roads, and all travelers were ordered to perform quarantine for several weeks. Sounds so familiar. Jesus. Ridiculous. One of the other sections even talks about preservative remedies, on page 113. It says, we shall content ourselves with abridging rather than translating at full length what other authors have said. Among other preservative issues are taken notice of. The author himself had one made in his left arm, which he kept open for a 12-month, but he is inclined to attribute his exemption from infection rather to his having avoided the contact of the sick and infected goods than to this remedy. It appears that 4 surgeons at the principal pest hospital died of the plague, notwithstanding they had all of them issues. Hence, their preservative virtues may be questioned. Yet, as they have been recommended by others and are attended with little inconvenience, he thinks it would be proper for those who are obliged to go among the infected to have one made in the arm or leg or both. Sweet spirit of nitre was esteemed an excellent preservative by some. They took 20 or 30 drops of it upon a lump of sugar several times a day. Others took with the same intention the Peruvian bark under different forms, but as they all kept out of the way of the contagion at the same time, the preservative powers of these remedies remained very doubtful. The common practice of carrying camphor in the pocket or sewed in the lining of the clothes has nothing to recommend it. In like manners, the smoking of tobacco, though it has been so strongly recommended by DiNo and others, is by no means a certain protection against the contagion. The Turks, said Dr. Martins, are continually smoking their pipes, and yet a great numbers of them are swept off by the plague every year. So it seems like this plague could be a matter of a bunch of different things. And when it only kills like a certain amount of people in a city and not just ravages throughout the whole thing, like it's kind of, you got to be a little skeptical of whether it's the plague or whatever, because the hospital and the news, I mean, all these things back then could manipulate everything just like they can now. So easy for everything to be manipulated, and for the certain types of materials and research and quote-unquote facts to continue throughout time while others get lost. So on page 117, it talks about the Foundling Hospital, which I found interesting. The Foundling Hospital is situated in the middle of the city at the conflux of the Yafa and Moskwa. It occupies a space of ground at that time only enclosed by a hedge 6 feet high, whose circumference measures nearly a French league. On this has been erected a building which might easily be made to contain 5,000 foundlings. That part of it, which was finished in 1769, contained 1,000 children and 300 adults. The rest, consisting of masters, servants, workmen, and soldiers, who amounted to nearly 100, lived in houses built of wood adjoining the stone edifice and standing within the enclosure. This enclosure had 3 gates. The Foundling Hospital, which contained about 1,000 children and 400 adults, was kept free from infection by the precautions hereafter mentioned. Only 4 workmen and as many soldiers who had gotten over the fences in the nighttime were seized at different times, but by immediately separating them from the rest of the house, the disorder was prevented from spreading any further. Thus this building was kept free from the plague at the time that it raged in all the other houses around it, a proof that the atmosphere, not only during the frost, but even during the great heat of the summer, did not serve as a vehicle for spreading the contagion, which was only propagated by contact of the sick or infected goods. There's another section that I mentioned, that I closed, showed a picture of, that states that they were really only socially distancing by a foot. So they recognized that you had to be within a foot of someone to get the disease, not 6, and not all this other nonsense of just keeping us apart, doing all these things. It's just all part of the same playbook. And the fact that they don't rule it out from coming from America at the very beginning in the preface is quite shocking and quite enlightening as well. Especially with all the news coming out now that this all may have been exactly as we all thought, fabricated by American governments, the deep state, secret media, all this nonsense, all these people in harmony with each other to ruin everyone's lives and make theirs better and enrich them. And this is even interesting too. Another paragraph in this book says, all who were attacked with the plague had more or less fever, though in some it was so slight as to be scarcely perceivable. In a few instances, the patients were seized from the first with a furious delirium, accompanied with a high degree of fever, but the greater part were affected with debility and only complained of oppression about the praecordia and headache. And so, again, asymptomatic, all this stuff, all these mental games from the controllers. Once they build up a state where they've got the people listening to certain sources, they always taint them with just doing nasty things for whoever the highest bidder is or whoever's got the power at the time. It's such a mess, and I hope it gets fixed. And I really hope that the scum gets cleaned out, because their bioweapons are not to be played with here on Earth. There's no need for them ever. Same with the mosquitoes about to be released in California and Florida. Wake up, everybody. DeSantis, you better put a stop to that, pal. Everyone better stand up, because these things are a mess, these anti-nature disasters. There's no need for them. All of this, to weaponize these things, and even if they don't even have to release anything, they can just use the media to release the poison of lies and filth and shameful propaganda, and that does just as bad and just as much damage. It seems like history keeps repeating itself only because we, the people, let it keep repeating itself. Like, we don't push the education of these historical events that show that, hey, this has been done before, this is the way out of it, this is the way to call their bluff, this is the way to end it quick. We need to learn, because they're ramping it up again. China and them are already coming. Fauci crawled out from under his hole, and everyone's getting back and ready for the next shutdown, which will initiate the starving or the food crisis or whatever. We have to pray that this is not the case and that it can be stopped, because that's what it seems like they want. Although the media always lies, we still have to be on the defense. Bless you all.